The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Tonight, John Michael McGrath and yours truly on Mark Carney and Donald Trump's Oval Office get-together. Plus, Premier Doug Ford's attempt to get the PM on board for what the opposition calls his fantasy tunnel under the 401. Then, Nam Kiwanuka in conversation with writer Chantal Braganza about the meaning of motherhood. That's all ahead on the agenda. JMM,
sir.
Little sugar to start. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Never stop wondering.
Axolotl questions.
Axolotl questions.
Yes.
What? Okay, as they used to say back in the day. Explain, Lucy. What is that?
Clearly, your kids are not in elementary school anymore. Axolotls have gone through a bit of a moment being very popular with young kids, and so now people are just making lots of puns about the name of the animal, the axolotl, which is, I guess, a type of amphibian. But this is also like an educational message, right? Stay curious. Axolotl questions.
Okay, and I know that you are dying to know what the story is behind what I'm wearing today. Okay, can we see this? Here we go. This, ladies and gentlemen, is Harry Nixon. And I tell you why I'm wearing Harry Nixon this week. Last week, Frank Miller was here. And he was here because it was the 40th anniversary of one of the most historically interesting and consequential elections in Ontario history. Frank Miller, in 1985, 40 years ago last week, won the most number of seats. But he was out on his ear 6 weeks later after the Liberals and New Democrats combined forces to end the 42-year-long PC dynasty. So I thought I would follow up with this guy, Harry Nixon, because he was the last Liberal premier before that PC dynasty kicked in. 82 years ago this month, he was sworn in as Ontario's 13th premier. Do you know what triskaidekaphobia is?
It's the fear of the number 13.
Correct.
Right? Yes.
Very good. Yes. Well, I think Mr. Nixon may have suffered from triskaidekaphobia because 13 turned out not to be a lucky number for him. It turns out that he was premier in 1943, which of course is midway through World War II. Yeah. Because of the war, we had not had an election in Ontario in a very long time. And Mr. Nixon thought that was wrong, that even during war, the public needed a chance to render its verdict on the government of the day. I think they hadn't had an election in 6 years. So he went to the polls, and the Liberals and Mr. Nixon lost, ushering in 42 straight years of Conservative governments. There's another reason that I am wearing Mr. Nixon on my chest today, and you will have to wait for your column, my column, to find out what the explanation is there. So stay tuned, everybody. More to come. All right. JMN, can we do a couple of shout-outs here?
Yes, absolutely.
I would like to give a shout-out to Gwen Rhodes and Sarah Hurwitz. These are two people I bumped into at two separate occasions this past week, and they are true, loyal viewers and or listeners of this program. And you know how I know that? Because they come up to me and they say, how's your buddy JMM doing? Or they say, hey, that's a funny T-shirt you got on today. What T-shirt are you wearing next week? So they get the shtick that we're doing here.
Yes.
And they axolotl questions.
Did I tell you I got made at the dog park? Somebody, the McGrath household recently got a dog, so I spent a lot more time out at the parks these days.
What's your dog's name?
Rosie.
Rosie.
Yes.
You are my posy. Very good.
And yeah, I was bringing Rosie back from the park one day, and somebody stopped me and said, "Hey, great work with TVO." And I was like, "Oh, thank you." And then I'm trying to, keep the dog from eating too much grass, that kind of thing. But yeah, no,
you're still not used to that, are you?
No. It still doesn't happen that often, so I think it's taking me a while to get used to it. But no, it's happening more often than it used to.
Well, you know why, buddy? Because you're on TV.
Yeah,
That's why.
It turns out when you're on TV, it's a bit more prominent than just hiding behind a keyboard.
Correct. Now, every week I have two obligations, right?
Yes.
What do I have to mention every week?
Bill Davis and Hamilton.
There you go. Okay. So let's get my Hamilton reference out of the way right now, okay?
Right. This is the city of Hamilton, not the late Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton or the F1 driver Lewis Hamilton.
Not him either. Yes. Thank you for that clarification. Yes, because I'm going back. Well, I go back to the Hammer every weekend because I like to visit my 91-year-old father who's there. But we are going back for 2 reasons this weekend. Yes, to see Dad, but also because Saturday, May 10th, 7 p.m. at the Music Hall, we are doing an episode of TVO Today Live. That's our town hall show in front of a live audience. There's all the poop on the screen right now. The intersection of music, the arts, and politics. And we have 3 wonderful guests to talk about all of the above. Sarah Harmer, Tom Wilson, Cadence Weapon, 3 wonderful singers, wonderful artists who are going to be our guests live and in living color. TVO.org/TVO Today Live. Go to that website, TVO.org/TVO Today Live. You can get free tickets there for the show. And we'll put a link in the podcast notes of the show as well so people can get that. Okay, good. So there's the Hamilton reference. Maybe I'll get a Davis reference in before we're done here.
I have faith.
Before we go on to talk about our Queen's Park stuff.
Yes.
We cannot deny ourselves the opportunity to weigh in on what happened in the Oval Office this past week.
Yes.
And the big question, of course, that all Canadians want to know the answer to was, did our Prime Minister get Zelensky'd by Donald Trump?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, just maybe some people aren't as up on all of the references, but of course we're talking about the ambush of the Ukrainian president. God, was that was last year, or was that earlier this year? No, it had to be earlier this year.
Yeah.
Yes. But yes, the seeming ambush and the poor treatment of the Ukrainian president by the president and vice president and people in the office. So it did not go that badly, right? I don't think anybody would say that Carney got Zelensky'd. It was relatively cordial as these things go. The president, the American president, did not seem to get abusive. Seemed
Well, he never called him governor. That was a good start.
Yeah. Got his title correct and did not bring up the 51st state talk. He was asked about it by reporters, and
he went there.
And he went there. Of course, he
lot.
did. But that did provide an opening for the Prime Minister to provide his own response, which I believe we've got a clip of here.
Mark Carney, let's go.
As you know from real estate, there are some places that are never for sale.
That's true.
We're sitting in one right now, Buckingham Palace, that you visited as well.
That's true.
And having met with the owners of Canada over the course of the campaign last several months, it's not for sale, won't be for sale ever. But the opportunity is in the partnership and what we can build together.
Now, that's a very sharp political answer, I have to say, because let's go through this a bit. He's got to walk a very difficult tightrope. On the one hand, he has to make it abundantly clear to the president, we're never going to be the 51st state. There is no support in this country for that idea, or next to no support for that idea, and he has to convey that to the president. On the other hand, he can't smack him around.
Yeah.
You cannot embarrass Donald Trump, or you're asking for a whole case of whoop ass, or whatever
Yes.
the expression is. Okay, so we know that he's got a very tough tightrope to walk. He made his point. We're not going to be the 51st state.
Yeah.
Some things are not for sale. And then he very cleverly pivoted to, but we've got lots of stuff we can do together. Let's look forward. Let's repair our relationship. So in that respect, not a bad day's work.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty deft. I think that we are getting an early vision of how Prime Minister Carney is different in several ways from Justin Trudeau. And that's not to say that I think that Justin Trudeau handled Trump's first term particularly badly, but clearly by the second Trump term, there's a much worse relationship, if I could put it that way. And so, yeah, I think we're getting a sense of Carney handling things reasonably well. He also did mention that he thought that the election debate was very helpful to Mark
He did
Carney.
mention a few times that he'd watched the leaders' debate. Yeah.
Yes, and one of the people at this table hosted that debate, so
Well,
congratulations on the reviews, I guess.
Well, I was kind of waiting for the moment where, the president was going to say, Mark, you did not a bad in that leaders' debate. The moderator was terrible, but you did okay. I was waiting for it. It didn't happen. I did notice that the former Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, and the former Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland, were both brought up by Mr. Trump, who left he certainly made it abundantly clear that he didn't like either one of them, professionally or personally.
Yes.
And I noticed the current Prime Minister didn't go to bat for either one of them, but I guess let's move on.
Yes.
And, he kind of, I won't say it was a perfect visit, because you saw at the very end, Donald Trump said, we don't need to buy your cars. We don't need to buy your lumber. We don't need to buy your steel. We don't need any of that stuff, which is obviously a stupid thing to say because Americans don't buy our stuff out of the goodness of their hearts. They buy it because it's good and cheaper than what they could get in the States. So, patently untrue. And then Mr. Trump said, and that's the end of the news conference, let's all go. So the Prime Minister did not get a chance to respond to any of that, but look, all in all, not bad.
Well, and he is going to get a chance. I don't think we had the chance to mention this last week. He will be able to respond in a way with the throne speech that was announced that King Charles III will come to Canada to open Parliament later this month. And that's only the third time in Canada's history that the reigning sovereign has delivered the speech from the throne. Charles's mother did it twice. This will now be the third time. And
the first time in your lifetime, but not the first time in my lifetime.
Yes, correct. So we will get a sense of how I think the federal government wants to continue threading this needle of how do you assert Canadian independence, Canadian sovereignty without overly antagonizing the American administration. And bringing in Charles III to do that is interesting. We will see how that all goes.
I think Canadians kind of held their breath during this Oval Office meeting because they'd seen the British Prime Minister go and have that one-on-one in the Oval with Donald Trump and was completely sycophantic. And I'm not sure that's a good look. And then Emmanuel Macron from France, the French president, went in there and actually put his hand on Trump's arm and corrected him in the middle of the meeting, which is a difficult thing to do. Yeah. So seemed like Prime Minister Carney was trying to find that middle ground between sycophancy and embarrassing and overruling him. I think most reviewers would say he found that path.
I think so.
Anything else?
No.
With that, let's get on to issue one. In a letter to Prime Minister Carney, Premier Doug Ford outlined what nation-building projects he believes the new federal government should focus on in the province of Ontario. JMM, why don't you take us through some of the highlights?
Absolutely. So I think no surprise, the number one item with a bullet, as they used to say, the ring of fire. The province is hoping that the federal government will match the $1 billion that the province is committed in funding to develop all-season roads that will allow for the mines to be built and to bring mined material into global markets. This is a huge problem with lots of remote mines in Northern Ontario. We kind of know the stuff is there. Lots of global companies interested in building and opening mines, but literally there are not all-season roads in this part of Ontario. There's also relations with Indigenous communities, of course, that need to be thought about here. Not, at least the last time I did any serious reporting on this, which is probably longer ago than it should have been. But there was a debate among Indigenous communities about do they even want to be connected to the rest of the...
Well, some are for and some are against.
Yeah, exactly. Indigenous communities are not monoliths. The province is also looking at funding and regulatory support for building out Ontario's nuclear fleet. We just had an announcement this week about the government is going ahead with the construction of small modular reactors at Darlington. We're going to talk a bit more about that later. Ford is also asking for policies that would help extend the lifespan of the province's natural gas plants. On transit, the Premier is asking the feds to fund their portion of nation-building transit projects. So 40% funding they're asking for 4 new subway projects and 50% of the cost of the Hamilton light rail system. We're getting multiple Hamilton mentions in the podcast this time around.
As we should.
And of course... taking a deep breath here.
Here we go.
My favorite topic, they are asking for support in building the tunnel under Highway 401.
Marketing and branding is everything, as we know. Yes. So if you describe it as the Premier's pet project, which he wants to get done, you may not find a lot of support in the national corridors of power. If, on the other hand, you describe it as a nation-building transit project, who knows, maybe a little more favor.
Yeah, I mean, I have a hard time imagining that Mark Carney, of all people, would not then ask the natural follow-up question, explain to me how this tunnel is a nation-building project. But that's a question for the Prime Minister to ask.
Indeed. Now, we mentioned Chrystia Freeland a second ago. Let's follow up with a little background here. She wrote a letter to the Government of Ontario back in November in which she outlined the commitments that the then Trudeau government would uphold including providing the province of Ontario with $15 billion in clean energy tax credits, $1.6 billion for housing. So those are promises that Doug Ford will certainly want to remind Mark Carney that his predecessor committed to.
Yep.
Doesn't necessarily mean the new guy will commit to them, but it's certainly, there's a paper trail there. Interesting that this was attached to the email that included Doug Ford's letter to Mr. Carney. So the province showing its receipts,
They've
as the
got their
kids say
paper trail,
nowadays,
yes.
right? We got a paper trail. The Premier also told reporters yesterday that he and his counterparts will be meeting with the Prime Minister in Saskatoon on the 2nd of June. We know that Doug Ford is not terribly pleased with the Alberta Premier, Danielle Smith, right now. Do you want to go into some of the details on that? Because, boy, that gets sticky.
Yeah, so Ford has kept some distance between himself and Smith for a while now.
Despite both being ostensibly conservative premiers.
Yes, they're both conservative premiers, but for example, Danielle Smith's government has introduced legislation regarding trans kids in schools that Ford has wanted really nothing to do with and has not really wanted to have his government associated with. There was a moment where Smith came for a meeting with Ford, I believe last year, if I'm remembering correctly, and Ford's office was very careful to spell out that like they were not talking education policy, that kind of thing. And now, of course, more recently, Danielle Smith has lowered the threshold under Alberta law to get a referendum put before the people. And this is
A referendum on separation.
Yes, and this is seen as kind of a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. It's not that the government is holding a referendum on separating Alberta from Canada. They're just making it really easy for the separatists that exist in Alberta to get this question on a ballot. So like that, the Premier Ford rather responded to that this week, saying like we should all be united as Canadians at this moment, and did not seem to give that particular idea a lot of time. But he did also say that he thought that something Mark Carney could do is I think he used the phrase that the federal government should show Alberta and Saskatchewan some more love than they have recently.
Right.
And specifically should get more pipelines built to move oil to global markets.
I suspect Ontarians want, well, look, I know this. We want Albertans to feel as Canadian as everybody else. We don't want them to feel like they have enormous grievances against the rest of the country and against Central Canada in particular.
Yes.
But look, I mean, I've been alive for 2 referendums on Quebec separation. You've been alive for one of them,
No, I
I
was
guess.
alive for both of them. Oh, no, sorry,
No.
for the, I was alive for the second Quebec referendum and the Charlottetown referendum.
Yeah.
So, but
First
not,
one was 1980. Were you around then? You weren't
No,
around then.
I mean, February 81, so I just missed that
You
one.
just missed that one. Anyway, I don't think I'm going out on a limb saying that most people in Canada don't love when you threaten separation if you're not getting what you want. Yeah. This country, it's tough enough to keep together at the best of times, and these are not the best of times. So I'm not sure that the Premier of Alberta is going to find a lot of favor outside Alberta with that move and that bill.
No, and also it doesn't seem to be a winning issue even inside Alberta based on what the polls say right now. That said, we are also the educational broadcaster, and I did write something for our website a few weeks ago about some of the historical grievances that Alberta and Saskatchewan and Manitoba feel about the way resource wealth has been used by Central Canada. And I don't think it's necessarily widely known. I certainly did not learn in Ontario's public schools that for a period of decades, the federal government was using Western natural resource wealth to functionally subsidize Ontario and Quebec.
Well, that was the national policy from the days of Sir Johnny MacDonald.
Yeah,
I mean, it goes way back.
And there's a reason why the issue of control over natural resources, it's not just about like Alberta wanting to greedily hoard its oil wealth, although it might be some of that too, but there is also, I think, a more legitimate historical grievance, and I'm sure people can find that on our website at tvo.org as well.
Wonderful. And with that, let's get off to issue 2. The province will bring down its budget for the 2025-26 fiscal year next week. Back in the day, governments jealously guarded budget measures until budget day, then introduced them all with great fanfare. Nowadays, governments love to scoop themselves by announcing various budgetary measures in the lead up to budget day. In which case, what's happening this year?
Right. So we've already had a bunch of announcements. The government will be expanding its skill development fund by $1 billion. As you recall, one of my rules of thumb for policy announcements is if the cash figure ends with the word billion, it's a real and substantial policy idea, and anything less than that is kind of just playing around. So this is a real policy. The intent is to help reskill workers who have been affected by U.S. tariffs announced by Donald Trump, for example. We've already heard of some layoffs at major manufacturers like GM laying off 750 workers in Oshawa. So these are the kinds of workers that the government is looking to help out with these kinds of funding announcements. The announcement from the government noted that Ontario will need about 500,000 workers to fill openings in the trades over the next decade. So, if you can reskill somebody who used to work on a GM assembly line and maybe now they can go into a building trade job, like aside from homes, there's lots of other stuff that this province is building. So that might be something that we can find some way to keep people whole. The government is also investing $1.3 billion to expand the Ontario-made manufacturing investment tax credit. Basically, this is a tax credit for companies that want to invest specifically in manufacturing capacity here. They are increasing the tax credit from 10 to 15%. So hopefully that will induce manufacturers to build more here. And then we mentioned earlier that on Thursday morning, the government announced that they have agreed with Ontario Power Generation, the provincially owned utility, is there to build the 4 small modular reactors at the Darlington site. This is going to cost something like $21 billion, 20.9 according to the government.
That was a B, right?
Yes.
20.9 billion. That's
Yes.
real money.
It's real money, and this is not going to be cheap nuclear power, right? We've been pretty fortunate in Ontario over the last decade where nuclear refurbishments, taking our existing reactors and sort of renovating them to extend their lifespan, that's been pretty affordable. And certainly by comparison, a lot of these projects have helped moderate electricity prices in Ontario. These SMRs are going to be relatively expensive electricity, but they are, the hope is that aside from potentially putting us in a position where we could export this technology to other jurisdictions, even just other jurisdictions in Canada, like they're hoping that maybe Alberta and Saskatchewan would be interested in a form of clean power. The other hope is that, the whole pitch for SMRs is they are small enough that in theory you could build a lot of them and get better at building them. And then, so the first reactor that you build is expensive. The second one is less expensive. The third and fourth are less expensive still. And then by the time you get to, in theory, if you were building 10 of them a year, probably not going to get to that scale, but just as an illustration, that's when it would start to get very, very cheap. So we will see how this all unfolds. Of course, the government has also announced plans to build a very, very large nuclear station in Port Hope. They are also looking around at other parts of the province if they are interested. But this week, anyway, the announcement is small modular reactors.
Should we remind people of the dirty little secret around these nuclear reactors? As in American technology, American contracts with American companies?
Yes, so there was a technical briefing for reporters on the Wednesday afternoon, and I raised this issue with somebody from OPG, and there was an interesting point they made, which was that yes, this specific reactor, unlike all of the other reactors we have in Ontario, which are CANDU reactors, yes, this is American technology. This is from GE Hitachi. The point they made is that even if they'd gone with CANDU, there are core parts of the CANDU design that would also have needed to be imported from the U.S. and so would also have been subject potentially to American export controls. And one other point that I think I've raised on the podcast before, CANDU reactors don't use enriched uranium as their fuel. These GE Hitachi reactors will use enriched uranium, and we don't enrich uranium here in Canada. There's currently no Canadian company that does this. So the obvious concern here is that we might be stuck buying enriched uranium fuel from the Americans as well. Again, we were told in the briefing that actually the relative good news here is that there are also French firms that we could potentially buy from as well. So at least in that sense, we might have some other options.
I must say, we're going to have Peter Bethlen-Falvey, the Minister of Finance, on the program. It'll be next Thursday. Budget day is Thursday, so we will have him on this program on Thursday. I don't envy his job this year at all. He is trying to come up with numbers that make sense at a time when tariffs are going from 5% to 10% to 25% to, in some cases, 100%, and how you write a budget under such unpredictable circumstances, I have no idea. You got any predictions about what's going to happen?
Well, one thing I would just say is look at where we are in the calendar, right? Folks may recall back in 2019, the Ford government, the still very young Ford government, introduced a very controversial budget that included cuts to spending in the same fiscal year, and the budget came out after April 1st. So a whole bunch of...
That's when the fiscal year begins.
Yes.
April 1st.
And so a whole bunch of cities, for example, suddenly learned that plans that they had made in their budgets already, they had to throw out because money they had expected from Queen's Park was not coming. We are already in May. I suspect, even if the government had not learned its lesson back in 2019, that was unpopular and bad, I suspect that given everything that is going on, and that we are already in May, that we are not looking at a budget that is going to announce a lot of really painful spending cuts. I think they are... they are all but signaling that this is not going to, at least this year, is not going to be a budget with a lot of austerity measures, a lot of restraint. They are primarily worried about just keeping the economy afloat in the face of a lot of chaos. That makes it difficult, though, because I think Peter Bethlen-Falvey is personally inclined to want to bring the budget back into balance. And there are also laws requiring that they at least present a path back to balance. And that's really difficult to do.
And let me just see, the politics of this. If you are going to run larger deficits than you want to, probably better that you do so early in your new mandate, which they have just received, as opposed to coming up to a second or third or a fourth potential election for this Ford government.
Yes.
So get the bad news out of the way early in hopes of having better news as you get closer to the next election.
And hope that economic growth chugs along at least well enough that you don't have to make really painful cuts closer to the election.
There you go. And with that, let's go on to issue 3. One of the results of last February's provincial election is that the Ontario Liberals have regained official party status in the legislature. That means they can ask questions in question period on a regular rotation. They get extra money for research budgets and staff. They get to sit on committees that study bills and introduce motions. But we got some sense this past week on the reality of being an official party when the government has a majority. Okay, what happened?
Yes, it turns out that elections don't change everything. So one of the privileges that the Liberals have had returned to them now is that they can introduce Opposition Day motions. And they had used this, their first Opposition Day motion to propose tax cuts for Ontarians, including eliminating the province's portion of HST on home heating and hydro bills, cutting the small business tax, cutting taxes for the middle class. These are all issues that Bonnie Crombie had run on in the recent election.
And you would think might have some support among Conservatives.
Yeah, since when do Conservatives not love tax cuts, right? The government did not, in fact, vote for this Liberal motion. They blocked its passage. Going to just do some brief rudimentary civics here. Motions cannot change policy. Motions do not make laws. Only bills can do that at the legislature. So even if this motion had passed, it would not have necessarily changed any tax rates in Ontario, but it would have been a sense of what the House wanted. And voting it down gives us a sense of how much credit the government is looking to share with the opposition.
And that number would be?
0 or very close to it.
Well, the Liberal leader, Bonnie Crombie, was also asked this week about something else that has been of interest since the last provincial election, in which she did not win a seat. We know that Pierre Poilievre has managed to get one of his backbenchers to resign, create a by-election so he can run there and get back into the House because he lost his seat on election night. Bonnie Crombie was asked whether she might take a page out of the Poilievre playbook. Let's see what she says. Bonnie Crombie.
My concern is that I have 14 very competent, very able members who work very hard to get here. They're needed. They're all pretty integral parts of our team. And so it is not my intent to ask one of them to leave, to step down. But I do want to note the difference of approach that the Prime Minister has taken with the Leader of the Opposition and how he's welcoming him back into the legislature and making an easy path for him. We'll call in a by-election as soon as possible. There was suggestion they may not even run a Liberal candidate. I don't know if they will or not, but they'll make it very easy. Unlike this government, because clearly they wanted to target me and my seat. So I found that a very different and very appropriate and magnanimous approach and how it used to be done in the past.
Well, she's right about that. That's the way it was done in the past. When a leader needed to get back into the House, you tended not to run a candidate from your party to go against them because it was considered bad form.
Right.
But those Marquess of Queensberry rules don't exist anymore.
Well, exactly. And what she's drawing attention to is, at his first post-election press conference, Mark Carney was asked if he would play any games with the timing of the by-election. Like, he's not obligated to hold a quick by-election. I think in theory he could have delayed it by 6 months. And he said no, he's not going to play any games with the timing.
So maybe the Marquess of Queensberry rules apply federally, but not provincially.
Well, at least a little bit here. But I do want to say the metaphor here is not exactly right and is not entirely in Bonnie Crombie's favor, because the only reason that Poilievre needs to find a new seat in the first place is in fact because the federal Liberals did to him exactly what Doug Ford did to Bonnie Crombie. They ran hard against him in his seat, and they won. And that's why they do these things, right?
That's right.
So the better question is, would Doug Ford be so magnanimous if a Liberal MPP created a vacancy so that Bonnie Crombie could run? She says she's not going to ask anybody to. That is a speculative exercise we can leave to our audience, because there is one other thing that I do want to make note of here. Mm-hmm. Steve, would you say that Bonnie Crombie was eager to associate herself and the Provincial Liberal Party with the Federal Liberal Party and Justin Trudeau before the most recent election?
I may have to get back to you on that. No, I don't have to get back to you on. I think the answer you're looking for is hell no.
Yeah, exactly right. Very, very different attitude this week. Part of it we saw in that clip, and there was much more, frankly, that we didn't include just for time. I think it is very fair to say that Bonnie Crombie is more than happy to see a restored National Liberal Party, very happy to see the party brand doing much better, and to be blunt about it, very happy to see a different Liberal leader really bringing the Liberal numbers back up, because we know that even before Bonnie Crombie won the Liberal leadership, you remember they had the Kitchener Centre by-election, yes, where the Liberals did very poorly in that by-election, and certainly when I spoke to people in that riding, they said we are just dying out here. We are really struggling because of the federal Liberal brand. So, as I say, a very different attitude, a long way to go for the provincial Liberals, who are still the third party in the legislature, but they clearly seem to be feeling better about their chances lately.
One of the things I find fascinating, and of course, Bonnie Crombie was looking for a seat in her hometown of Mississauga. In the provincial election, I think there's 6 seats in Mississauga. In the provincial election, how many seats did the Liberals win in Mississauga?
What?
Zero.
Oh, that's right. I keep thinking there was one that was a recount or something, but maybe I'm mixing that up.
In the federal election, there are 6 federal seats in Mississauga. How many did the Liberals win in that election?
Was it 6?
All of them.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just so fascinating. These elections are 2 months apart. Clean sweep for one side, clean sweep for the other side. Politics, timing, leadership. I mean, so much matters, right?
Yeah, no, and the 905, we talk about how important it is in elections. And I know for people who live outside of Toronto, the intense focus on Toronto and GTA area ridings is irksome, and I sympathize in some ways. But it's just there's nowhere else in the country that concentrates these many ridings that are so prone to changing.
Swing.
Right?
They are in play. Every election, they are in play.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If anybody would like to ask about content on the show, you can always email us at onpolitics@tvo.org.
There we go. That is the On Poly podcast for this Friday, May the 9th, 2025.
You can follow our show on Apple Podcasts so that you get notified each time a new episode is available, and you can see the video version of the podcast on the TVO Today YouTube channel.
Join us next week for our usual budget special. We're going to be recording our episode of the On Poly podcast. We're going to do it live. As part of the agenda on Thursday, May 15th, 8 p.m. live. So look forward to that in your subscription feed on Friday. Or, of course, you can just watch us live Thursday night on television, on your laptop, on your smartphone, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. There we go. And with that, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
From mommy bloggers and hyper-organized TikTok moms to feminist manifestos on the value of domestic labor, motherhood has become a hot topic. And in her new book, Story of Your Mother, Chantal Braganza looks for fresh ways to define the life-altering experience, both intellectually and very personally. She's also a senior editor at Chatelaine Magazine, and she joins us now for more. Hi, Chantal.
Hi.
Welcome home. Chantal actually used to work here at TVO. It's nice to have you.
It's good to be back.
And your first TV interview, too, for your book.
It is, yes.
Yeah.
My first TV interview for, I think, anything.
Well, it's great that you're here. Congratulations. We're all very happy for you. I wanted to start this conversation by reading something that you wrote in the book. You write, motherhood as subject, motherhood as genre. While understanding motherhood this way can spotlight stories our culture is often eager to ignore, a genre is easy to pigeonhole. A subject too prone to being spoken about in absolutes about an experience that is not necessarily universal. It hadn't yet occurred to me that motherhood could also be understood as structure, an organizing principle, infinitely interpretable. How does, as you call it, the motherhood genre help and hinder people looking for guidance as they prepare for the changes that come with becoming a mother?
Personally, I think around the time when I went through my first couple of pregnancies, this would have been like mid-2010s, there was a burgeoning genre of literature that at the time critics, book reviewers, and the people marketing the books called the new literature of motherhood. Memoirs that asked questions, investigated the ideas around motherhood, the culture of motherhood in intellectual and literary ways, and as such suggesting that had never happened before. That was interesting to me, given that I was a new mother at the time, or in the process of becoming one. But after a while, when you read enough, it becomes apparent that nothing about motherhood literature is really new. I think as long as people have been able to make their stories known to the world, people have been telling stories about the experience of motherhood for a very long time. And I think at this point now, when thinking about motherhood literature as a genre, it's useful in terms of finding the literature that you want, but maybe not as much in inviting people in to stories about motherhood. Or that use motherhood as a way of telling maybe another story. When you make something a genre, by its very nature, you're saying this is interesting to a certain kind of person and also not interesting to a certain kind of person. So
what did you want to add to the dialogue?
I wanted to, at some point while writing the book, this I didn't start out this way, but at a certain point, it became very difficult for me to say that I was writing a book about motherhood because people experience it in different ways. And people experience aspects of motherhoods without even being a mother. So how could I make a document that felt true to my experience of it and also be translatable for other people in my life and also other readers who haven't experienced it themselves? In particular, my son, who many parts of the book is addressed to.
That was something I wanted to ask you. Some of the chapters, you write it as if you're speaking to him. Mm-hmm. Why did you approach telling your stories in that way?
One thing that I wanted to get across and that felt very natural to me was to write as though I was talking to my son in a way that I couldn't and probably still can't speak to him now. He's 8 years old. He's very smart. I think some of the questions that he was asking and that children by nature ask, the story of your parents before you were born, the story of how you were born as a child, how your parents met, where are they from? You have these answers that you give them when they're younger. They change as they get older, as they form their own understandings of it. And I hope it's apparent in the book that, from the very beginning, I couldn't wait to tell him the version that I want to tell him, even if I can't give it to him now. And that one day, maybe 10, 15, 20 years from now, he'll read it and that'll be apparent to him.
I just wanted to go back to something that you said earlier about not everybody who has a child is necessarily a mother. Mm-hmm. Why was that important for you to kind of investigate?
I think for a couple of reasons. There's the fact that there are different ways to be a mother. I mean, when we talk about motherhood, are we talking about gestation? Are we talking about childcare? Are we talking about a legal relationship? There are people who find mother figures in their life because their own biological mother is either not present or, it's a strained and troubled relationship. But they have other people in their life who fulfilled that role.
Because I think also, too, when you have these absolutes about who can be a mother,
yes,
or it's just like your mother, and if your mother might not be a mother in the way we expect mothers to be, if they're not nurturing, if they don't accept you, then it adds kind of this injury that you can't really come back from as a child, mm-hmm, right?
And you can find that elsewhere, I think. So yeah.
It comes in different ways. You write, there's a line to walk that displays a specific level of both satisfaction and dissatisfaction with contemporary motherhood. What is that line?
I'm still experiencing it now. I think culturally, where we're at now, there's this unspoken agreement that if a mother is too happy in her job as being a mother, that there must be something wrong with her, that she's not investigating other aspects of her life, that you can't be too happy as a mother and have that be the only thing that makes you happy.
Why do you think that is?
I think that part of it comes from the idea that a level of cultural scorn that we have for people who are stay-at-home mothers. Even as we're in a moment now where we see tradwife content becoming a big thing on social media, mm-hmm, there still is this assumption that you're doing this, but you also have a public life. And then at the same turn, you can't be too disinterested in your life as a mother and want to have your life outside of that be it an important thing, or else you're not doing a good enough job as a mother.
So a lot of judgment.
You have to be in conflict or else you're doing it wrong, I think.
And the tradwife movement, she explained, it's on social media where different aspects of, I guess what people would say is traditional motherhood, cooking, cleaning, staying at home, taking care of your children.
Making them the most, nutritious, organic, made from scratch food, mm-hmm, sewing their clothing, having every waking moment of your life being in service of
your children.
One job.
You also write, I've been thinking about return as a form of reproduction. One story told many times over, each one a little true. What did you mean by that?
There is a moment in the book early on where I tell a story to my son when he was about 4 years old about my father. And it's not really a story. It's just like an anecdote about his life, which was a story that he told me when I was younger. But the three of us, this 4-year-old, me in my early 30s, and my father had different understandings of what this one thing meant. And it was so interesting to me that by nature, this one thing that, my father, one of his first jobs when he moved to Canada, just like a side job that he had, different understandings of what it meant and our reactions to that. It, I think, was a pivotal moment in how I understood what I was trying to write. And I think it made it easier to write in a way. one story told many times over, each one a little true, understood differently. And I think also speaks to the nature of how we understand a single story that is part of our inheritance, history, heritage.
It's kind of like when you grow up in a family and everybody has a different interpretation of what life was like in that family.
And your own interpretation may change with time.
The title of the book is Story of Your Mother, and the way that I read it was you're talking to your son. This is a story for them of your mother, but it also could imply to your mother. You talked a little bit about your dad. Can you tell us a bit more about your parents, including your mom?
So I talk a little bit about my father in the book. And I do talk about my mother, but maybe a little bit less directly. There are sections in the book where I have actual dialogue with my father, and I'm talking about stories that he's told me or aspects of history that he's explaining or that we're explaining to each other. There's other sections in the book where it isn't immediately clear, but someone is telling me a story about, where I come from, or stories about my past that precede my being born. And there are stories from my mom. There are stories about how my parents met, their early years living here, shortly after I was born, my brother was born. And they take on the nature of, the story of the quality of a parent telling a child a story. And that's her presence in the book.
Oh, I thought it was interesting that you said in the book you have dialogue with your father, but with your mom you say it's less directly. Was that intentional, or was that something that you realized afterwards?
I think it's intentional.
Why? Why? Can you?
They're very, I hope, representative of the way that we communicate with each other, or that I communicate with my parents differently.
You grew up in a multilingual family, and is that important for you to pass on to your children?
I'm starting to understand just how hard it is to do that. When I was growing up, when I was very young, Spanish was my first language. My grandmother and aunts were in the home. They only spoke Spanish to me. And when you live in an environment like that, it's very easy and almost effortless you have no other choice. That's the language that you speak. My husband doesn't speak Spanish, and I have to very much make the conscious effort to pull my kids into it if I want them to learn. And by nature, of course, they're going to be resistant to it. I mean, I was as a child too. My mother tried to take me to Spanish classes on Saturdays. Who wants to go to school on a Saturday? It's work. And I'm definitely not as successful in it as my own parents were, but I'm trying.
Mexico has an important place in your writing, the food, the language. Why is it so meaningful in terms of home and belonging?
As a child, we went to visit family quite often. And I think that when you form core memories at that point in your life, they stick with you for a very long time. They're identity forming. I definitely don't visit as much as I used to, and definitely not for the stretches of time that I did as a young child. And I think that that period of time, it had a profound impact on how, my taste in food, on my interest in seeing other places, my comfort with my desire to see other places.
An unusual way you talk about motherhood is with a meditation of sorts on sourdough starter. I did try to bake because I'm not good in the kitchen, but I did try to bake during the pandemic, and I made one loaf that was perfection.
Yes.
Can you tell us that story about the sourdough starter and motherhood?
When I was on mat leave with my first child, so the first 3 months, I spent a lot of time on on trading apps, scrolling through trading apps for, I don't know, it was just an anxiety calming thing, trading a free pair of boots for whatever. And this listing came up for sourdough starter. And I do love to cook, and I had never made sourdough before. And I thought, I'll take a sourdough starter home. And it's
in exchange for lip gloss?
In exchange for lip gloss. And it's just this additional thing in my home that I need to care for, but the stakes for it were nothing. I'm taking care of this new child in my life and also feeding this little starter a bit of flour every day, every couple of days. And look, there's some beautiful bread as a byproduct of that. And it wasn't apparent to me then, but, thinking about it now, using it as a means of just being able to exercise control in one small aspect of your life when everything else is very new and feels world reordering. It was a moment of calm, and I still think about it. It's not motherhood specifically, but it was a very useful tool at that time.
You mentioned the word control. Anyone who's ever had a new baby realizes that it's kids of any age. Parenting is a very humbling experience. You're not in control of a lot. And in your early months, early years of parenthood, you were dealing with the pandemic. A lot happened in your family during your early years as a mother. At one point, your son takes your face in his hands and asks you this question: are you another mama? That essay, I was bawling. What led to this moment of your son taking your face in his hands and asking you, are you another mama?
So that was a really rough summer for a number of reasons. My son would have been 4.5 at the time. So he was older. My younger son was just a small infant at the time. And it was, high pandemic. We're all at home. We're all around each other all the time. And it was a time in our family's life where I was very much interested in trying to keep things as same and normal feeling as possible, when it was very difficult and maybe not even advisable to try to do that at the expense of acknowledging that things are a little bit crazy right now. Kids know. Like, they know when something feels off, and something felt off to him. And I'm really happy that he was able to identify it, felt comfortable saying it, even if it was maybe a little bit jarring to be called out on it at the time.
I think it was an important essay to write. I think when people read it, they'll find out all the events that led up to that moment. But when March of 2025 it marked 5 years since the pandemic. A lot of women had children during that time, and a lot of things changed in how villages, how our society operates in childcare, having extended family look after children, but giving birth during that time, and also seeing it's a time of great joy having a child, but then it's a time of great loss. And I think the fact that you marked that, I think it's going to help a lot of other mothers who may have gone through that time. Was it difficult to write about something that, because you're telling the stories of your family members, is it difficult to tell the stories of other people while you're trying to be as honest as you can in your own story?
Oh, yeah. I also think that I might have written about it differently had I waited. So there is...
Had you waited for what?
Had I waited longer, had I waited for like 10 years out from the experience, longer, I might have looked back on it differently. I think there's advantages and disadvantages to that. Like, you're closer to it, it feels more painful. But I think that there is something useful in being closer to the experience, having enough removed from it to be able to make sense of it, but not so far that you don't remember maybe some of the parts that made it feel either more painful or, I don't know, there's so much about the pandemic that we've suppressed. So I'm glad I got it down now.
How does motherhood reshape relationships?
I would imagine this is different for everyone, but if part of your experience involves that crucible of daily ministrations of care for an infant, and being involved, like that, the physical, intense labor of feeding, sleeplessness, that alone, and it's just one aspect of it, but it's huge, I would hope would change your relationship with and your understanding of anyone who's had to care for somebody, whether that's an infant, the elderly, your understanding of and relationship to how various forms of labor in our society,
unpaid labor,
unpaid, underpaid, unrecognized, poor supports for it. There was a moment at the beginning of the pandemic where it seemed like we were going to get to that global understanding of how important that is. I don't know if we've carried that lesson through with us fully, but I hope we get there.
I always tell my friends, be patient with your mom friends, because they're not in Vegas dancing on tables. They're probably buried under laundry and spit up, right? In our final few minutes, I wanted to talk about the final chapter. You write that in the future, you remember this time as, quote, a period when, as much as labor and label, motherhood constituted a form of time travel. What do you hope your children will come to understand when they're old enough to understand, to read this book?
When they're old enough to, and then maybe later on. I think when I talk about children as a form of time travel, there's the aspect of me better being able to understand or getting closer to understanding my parents' experience, being new parents, my hopes for my kids later on, whether or not children will be part of their life, how I'll fit into that. I hope that they come away with it, from it, with the understanding that I've been thinking about these things for a very long time.
How do you hope they understand you as a mother and the decisions that you may have made?
I'd be curious to know what their understanding is first. I know that's not a satisfying answer, but I'm very interested to know.
Chantal, congratulations. It's a beautiful book.
Thank you.
And I'm not just proud of you because I'm your friend, but it's ever since you were here at TVO, this is something that you wanted to do, and you went and did it. You keep saying it took you a long time to do it.
It took a very long time, yes.
You started and you finished, and that's what matters. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thank you very much.
And that is the agenda for Friday, May the 9th, 2025. Monday on the program, Namkiwanuka and guests will explore why some parents are reluctant to vaccinate their kids against measles. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org. And Nam, we'll see you here on Monday.